what if those stories, the ones about gods dying and rising again, what if they weren't just grand myths from old books?
Right, like they're more than just stories.
Exactly. What if they reflect something much, much older, something tied like directly to the food we eat?
To the harvest cycle itself.
Yes. So today we're doing a deep dive into some really fascinating sources.
Mm.
We've got ancient texts, historical accounts, ethnographic notes, quite a collection.
Hmm.
And our mission really is to try and uncover the origins of these incredibly old, widespread beliefs, specifically this whole death and resurrection idea for deities.
And how it connects fundamentally to the annual cycle of vegetation, to getting a good harvest.
Which was everything, right? And you'll see how these ideas, which go way back before recorded history even, they still kind of echo in folk customs all over the world, even today.
What's really compelling, I think, is just how consistent these patterns are. You know, whether you're looking at these big, powerful gods and massive temples, or just like simple village traditions. This theme, the dying and rising god, it just keeps showing up.
It really does.
Well, it makes you ask, what was really driving these rituals? What did people actually think they were achieving?
Let's start with Adonis. That's a name maybe people recognize. But his story, well, our sources show it goes much deeper than just, a handsome guy.
Right. His name, Adon, it actually means Lord in Phoenician. He was worshipped widely by Semitic peoples way before the Greeks adopted him.
Okay.
And the myth itself. A fair young man, Aphrodite loved him, but he's tragically killed by a boar, right in his prime.
Classic tragedy.
And annually, his death was mourned. Bitter wailing, mostly by women, the sources say. They'd carry out these images of Adonis, often made to look like corpses, as if for burial, and then they'd ritually throw them into the sea or into springs.
And then, was that the end?
Well, in some places, no. His revival, his return to life, was celebrated the very next day. A quick turnaround.
And there's that really vivid detail, too, from Biblos about the river.
Oh, yeah. The river Adonis turning crimson in spring. It was red earth, washed down by the rains, but people absolutely believed it was Adonis's blood.
His blood shed again each year on Mount Lebanon.
Exactly. Even the red anemone flower was said to spring from his blood. It's like the landscape itself participated in the mourning and rebirth.
You can almost picture it. It makes the myth so grounded.
And that connection to the land, to the cycles, it gets even clearer when we look at these things called the Gardens of Adonis.
Ah, yes, tell us about those. They weren't actual gardens, were they?
Not really, not like we think of them. They were small baskets or pots filled with earth, and they'd sow wheat, barley, lettuces, flowers.
Okay.
And these things would shoot up really fast because of the sun's heat, but they didn't have deep roots. So.
They'd wither just as quickly.
Exactly. Quick growth, quick death.
So what's the big idea behind these gardens? What were they for?
Well, they weren't just, decorations. This is sympathetic magic in action. It's brilliant, really. These little gardens, showing that rapid growth and decay, they were carried out along with the images of the dead Adonis. And then, crucially, flung into water.
Okay, so mimicking nature.
Right. The belief was, by acting out that quick growth, you could somehow compel a good harvest in the actual fields.
And throwing them into water, that's for rain.
Precisely. A charm to secure that essential fertilizing rain. So it seems it wasn't just about remembering a god, it was about actively participating, trying to nudge that cycle of life along.
Trying to give nature a helping hand, almost.
That's a really crucial point. And if we connect this wider, there's the Babylonian legend of Ishtar fetching the water of life for Tammuz, where water was literally poured over him during a mourning ceremony. It just reinforces this idea of water being used to bring about the god's resurrection and therefore vegetation's resurrection.
And you see similar things closer to home, right? In European folk custom.
Absolutely. Throwing effigies out, symbolic figures of death or carnival into water at certain times of the year.
Right, I've heard of that.
Or drenching someone dressed in leaves who clearly represents the spirit of vegetation. Or even just drenching the last sheaf of corn cut at harvest. All done to bring rain.
And this was happening all across Europe.
Yeah, our sources mention examples from Wallachia, Transylvania, Prussia.
Yeah.
People really believed these actions could prevent drought and ensure fertility for the next year.
Okay, so moving from the Semitic Adonis, let's shift focus a bit to Phrygia, to the god Attis. Does he follow a similar pattern?
He absolutely does. Attis echoes these themes very strongly, but maybe introduces even more direct, almost visceral rituals connected to the dying and rising god idea.
How so?
Well, like Adonis, Attis was a god of vegetation. His death and resurrection were marked each spring with mourning and celebration. In fact, the ancients themselves sometimes identified Attis and Adonis. Their legends and rites were that similar.
So what's his story?
He was loved by Ophelia, the great Phrygian mother goddess. His myth, well, it has a couple of versions, similar again to Adonis. Either killed by a boar or, and this is different, he self-mutilated under a pine tree. Died from the blood loss.
Wow, okay, that's intense.
It is. And violets were said to spring from his blood, just like anemones from Adonis's. Another plant connection.
And after death?
He was said to have changed into a pine tree, which is, quite a statement.
Yeah, the evergreen, symbolizing renewal even through death.
Precisely. It suggests that through sacrifice, even self-inflicted, life transforms and persists.
And his worshippers. You mentioned something specific about them.
Yes, especially in Pessinus, a big center for Cybele worship. They wouldn't eat pork, which seems to point back to that boar myth, doesn't it?
It certainly suggests it. And the rituals.
At the spring equinox, they'd go into the woods, cut down a pine tree, bring it into Cybele's sanctuary.
Like a sacred object.
Yes. They'd wrap it in wool, adorn it with violets, and attach an effigy, a figure of a young man representing Attis, to the trunk.
Okay. And then?
Then came the third day of the festival, known as the Day of Blood.
Sounds ominous.
It was. The high priest would actually draw his own blood as an offering, mourning over the effigy of Attis.
His own blood.
Yes. And this morning, this Day of Blood, was followed by the Hilaria, the festival of joy, celebrating Attis's resurrection.
But here's something really striking you mentioned earlier. The high priest himself was actually called Attis.
That's right, which strongly suggests, doesn't it, that he might have literally played the part of the god in the annual festival.
Possibly even mimicking the god's self-mutilation, that Day of Blood.
It's a strong possibility. Some scholars think this ritual, mimic killing of the priest with real blood involved, might have been a later substitute for an actual earlier human sacrifice.
So the priest became the god, momentarily, perhaps even dying symbolically for the community.
Leading scholars certainly thought so, that the representative of the god was likely slain each year, mirroring the god's own death in the myth. There's another detail, too. Worshippers of Attis, much like at Adonis ceremonies, they abstained from certain foods.
Besides pork.
Yes, they avoided seeds and roots of vegetables, just like the women avoided ground corn for Adonis. It was likely seen as, sacrilegious, like eating the god's own body.
That's a powerful taboo. Okay, let's travel now to ancient Egypt, to Osiris. He's such a huge figure, maybe more complex.
Definitely complex.
Yeah.
But our sources really emphasize his core role as a god of vegetation. That seems to be fundamental.
How so? What's his connection?
Well, the myth says he's the one who taught Egyptians agriculture. He discovered wheat and barley. He's the bringer of civilization through farming.
But there's betrayal, right? His brother Set.
Yes. Set, along with 72 others, plotted against him. They tricked him into lying down in a beautifully crafted coffer or chest. Then slammed it shut, nailed it, and threw it into the Nile.
Drowned, like Adonis thrown into the water.
Similar motif, yes.
Yeah.
His sister and wife Isis searches desperately for him, finds the coffer eventually of Byblos, actually encased inside a living tree that had grown around it.
Amazing image.
But the story doesn't end there. Set finds the body again, and this time, in pure malice, he dismembers Osiris into 14 pieces, scatters them all over Egypt.
14 pieces, that number seems specific.
It does. We might come back to that. Isis, though, she doesn't give up. She patiently searches for and reassembles the pieces, burying each one where she finds it.
And the rituals for Osiris, how did they reflect this myth?
The annual rites involved 5 days of mourning. It started with something called earth plowing, which literally marked the beginning of the agricultural season.
Very practical.
Very. And the lamentations of Isis and her sister Nephthys during these rites, they sound remarkably like the wailing for Adonis we discussed.
That same intense grief.
Exactly. And then the festival culminated in the erection of the tattoo pillar. This happened around mid-November.
The tattoo pillar, what was that?
It's often shown as a column with crossbars, maybe representing layers, or sometimes just like a bare tree trunk. It was interpreted as Osiris's backbone.
Its backbone.
Yes. Symbolizing his body being reassembled, his resurrection, standing tall again.
That's a powerful symbol. Is there more direct evidence connecting him to vegetation?
Oh, absolutely. The visual proof is compelling. In ancient temples, like at Philae, There are reliefs showing Osiris's dead body,
Oh, okay.
and corn stalks are literally springing from his body,
Mm-hmm.
and a priest is watering them,
Wow. You can't get much clearer than that.
right? And the inscription seals it. It calls him Osiris of the Mysteries, who springs from the returning waters. He is the corn, personified, returning with the flood.
Okay, so that seems pretty definitive. But you mentioned some people try to link Osiris to the sun. How did the sources address that?
Yeah, that's a common interpretation, but our sources strongly argue against it being his primary identity. The key evidence against the sun theory is, well, pretty straightforward.
Which is?
The sun can't be torn into pieces, can it? And it doesn't really die annually in the same way vegetation does, especially in temperate zones, where these myths likely resonated strongly. Its power wanes, sure, but it doesn't get dismembered and reassembled.
Good point.
Plus, the ancient writers themselves consistently grouped Osiris with Adonis, Attis, Dionysus. They saw them as the same type of deity, vegetation gods.
Okay, so if not the sun, you mentioned the number 14 earlier. Does that connect elsewhere?
Well, it's suggestive, isn't it? The moon. Its 28-day cycle waning into, well, roughly 14 pieces or days of disappearance before renewal. That cyclical pattern fits the myth much better than the sun's daily or annual path.
That's a fascinating possibility. So the idea of Osiris as a sun god might be?
It seems likely to be a later interpretation, maybe philosophical, allegorical, not his original gut-level identity tied to the life-giving earth and its cycles.
Right, rooted in that agricultural reality. Okay, let's keep moving. What about Dionysus? He's usually the god of wine, right?
Wine, yes, but also trees more broadly. Our sources show he had deep connections there. He was called Dionysus of the tree. Sometimes his image wasn't even human-like, just a simple post draped with branches.
Interesting. Not just the grapevine, then.
No, patron of cultivated trees in general. People prayed to him to make trees grow and flourish.
And his myth. Does it involve a violent death and rebirth?
Oh, absolutely. The Cretan version is particularly striking. He's torn limb from limb by the Titans.
Like Osiris.
Exactly. Then they boiled his flesh and ate it. Only his heart was saved, hidden away, and from that heart he was reborn.
Reborn from the heart. And the Platte connection.
Pomegranates were said to spring from his spilled blood. Again, that recurring motif, violets, anemones, pomegranates, life from death, right there in the earth.
And the rituals associated with him, they could be quite extreme, couldn't they?
Extremely. Dionysus was often represented as, or associated with, a bull or a goat. Bull-born, bull-shaped, the kid.
Mm-hmm.
And his worshippers, in their ecstatic rites, would sometimes literally tear apart live bulls or goats and devour the raw flesh.
Devour them raw. Why?
They believed they were consuming the god himself, eating his flesh, drinking his blood, absorbing his divine power.
Okay, let's unpack that. It sounds paradoxical. Why sacrifice the god to himself?
It points to a fascinating evolution in belief, doesn't it? The thinking is, originally the animal was the god. The bull was Dionysus.
Not just a symbol, but the actual embodiment.
Right. But over time, as the concept of the god became more human-like, more anthropomorphic, as you said earlier.
Given human form and characteristics.
Exactly. Then the ritual killing shifted. It became a sacrifice to the now human-like god. And they'd often rationalize it, saying, oh, the animal deserved it. It harmed the crops, like a goat nibbling the vines.
So the god ends up eating his own earlier form, almost.
Precisely. Which leads to these strange titles, like Dionysus, the bull god, being called eater of bulls. It takes us back to a very primal stage of religious thought.
And does this connect to human sacrifice, too? Were there echoes of that?
There seem to be, yes. Sources mention instances, maybe rare or legendary, but suggestive. Humans being torn apart in Dionysian contexts in places like Chios or Tenedos, or that strange ritual in Orchomenus where a priest with a sword chased women, apparently with license to kill one.
So maybe the animal sacrifice was, again, a later substitute for an earlier human one.
It's a strong possibility, suggesting these rites might have originally involved embodying the god in a human victim.
Chilling. Okay, let's turn to Greece again, but to Demeter and Proserpine, the corn mother and her daughter. How do they fit this pattern?
Well, their myth is, in substance, basically identical to the cults of Adonis, Attis, and Osiris that we've been talking about.
So.
You have a goddess, Demeter, mourning a lost loved one, her daughter, Proserpine or Persephone. And that lost one clearly personifies vegetation, especially corn, which dies, disappears, and then revives.
So the same core story. Loss, mourning, return, linked to plants.
Exactly. The key difference here, perhaps, is that the lost one is female, the daughter, and both mother and daughter are essentially corn goddesses. Scholars call it a mythical reduplication.
A doubling up of the same idea.
Sort of, yes. Two aspects of the same power. Proserpine is abducted by Pluto, god of the underworld. Demeter, in her grief, stops all seeds from growing. Everything withers.
Bringing the world to a standstill.
Until Zeus steps in and brokers a deal. Proserpine will spend part of the year underground with Pluto and part of the year above ground with her mother.
Which is a perfect image for
For the cycle of grain, absolutely. Sown underground, seemingly dead, then sprouting back into the light. And Demeter's name itself is revealing.
What does it mean?
It likely comes from an old Cretan word for barley. So Demeter literally means barley mother, or just corn mother.
Right there in the name. Okay, this is where it gets really fascinating for me, the connection to modern customs. How did these ancient myths show up later?
It's truly striking how directly they seem to survive in European harvest customs, almost up to the present day. For instance, across Germany, Scandinavia, Slavic countries, the spirit of the corn is often personified.
As what?
As the corn mother, or sometimes the old woman or the grandmother. Often, the very last sheaf cut at harvest is fashioned into a female figure, an effigy, basically.
Made from the last stalks.
Yes. Dressed in clothes, treated with real reverence, brought home.
And the magic, the sympathetic magic we saw with Adonis's gardens, does that continue?
Absolutely. They'd drench these corn mother figures with water again, the rain charm. They'd scatter grains from that last sheaf onto the newly sown fields for fertility next year. Or feed it straw to the cattle to make them thrive.
Using the essence of the last harvest to ensure the next.
Exactly. And sometimes the spirit isn't old, but young, the maiden or the corn baby. The last bit of corn might be cut by the prettiest girl in the village, dressed up like a doll, brought home in triumph, kept for good luck.
It's incredible how these specific folk practices, which maybe seem like just quaint superstitions,
Right.
they just perfectly mirror the core ideas of these grand ancient myths. It's like seeing Osiris or Demeter still there working in the fields, just in a different form.
It really is. And our sources even describe this amazing custom from Prussia. A boy would be wrapped up in the last sheaf of corn,
Okay.
and he'd whimper like a newborn baby. And the woman who bound the sheaf would pretend to be in labor,
Wow. Mimicking the birth of the corn spirit for the next year.
explicitly acting it out. And you find similar echoes globally, the maize mother puppet kept for a year in Peru, the Zapotec burying the finest sheaf, the Dayak ceremonies for the soul of the rice in Borneo.
So this connection, this personification of the crop spirit, it's almost universal where grain is grown.
It seems that way. And it raises an important point about how religious ideas might evolve, doesn't it?
How do you mean?
Well, what seems to start as this belief in an immanent spirit, a spirit dwelling inside the corn itself.
Right, part of the plant.
Over time, that spirit seems to become externalized, anthropomorphized. It becomes a god or goddess controlling the corn from outside rather than being in it.
The spirit becomes a deity.
Exactly. And that process, that humanizing of the divine power in the crop, might even explain why you get both a mother and a daughter figure like Demeter and Proserpine. The old spirit maybe becomes the overarching deity, and a new spirit is needed for the actual plant itself each year.
That's a really interesting way to think about that duplication. Okay, now there's a darker side to some of these harvest customs too, isn't there? Linked to the death part of the cycle.
Yes, definitely. We talked about the lamentations, the mourning songs, the Egyptian moneros, meaning come thou back, sung over the first cut ears.
A dirge for the dying corn spirit.
Precisely. And the Phoenician Linus, woe to us, sung at the grape harvest. And in Phrygia, that song the harvesters sang was called Lityerses.
Lityerses. There's a myth attached to that name, isn't there? A rather grim one.
Very grim. Lityerses was said to be a son of King Midas, him of the golden touch. And Lityerses had this habit of compelling strangers passing by to reap with him in his fields.
Okay, a bit unusual, but maybe hospitable?
Not quite, because afterwards he'd wrap them up in a sheaf of corn, cut off their heads with his sickle,
What?
and then throw their bodies, still wrapped in the corn, into the river Meander.
That's horrific. Why?
The myth doesn't fully explain why, but he was eventually killed himself by Heracles, no less in the exact same way, beheaded and thrown into the river. It's a story that screams ritual significance.
And you're saying this finds echoes in actual European folk customs, not the beheading, surely.
Not the literal beheading, no, but the symbolic killing or humiliation of someone representing the corn spirit. Absolutely.
How did that work?
Well, often there was this contest among the harvesters. Nobody wanted to be the last one cutting or binding the last sheaf or even threshing the last bit of grain, because that last person was identified with the corn spirit, often called the old man or the old woman. And they got some rough treatment.
Like what?
Tied up in straw or sheaves, carried around, sometimes beaten playfully, often drenched with water.
Uh-huh.
There's the rain charm again. It represents the death of the corn spirit for that year.
So those seemingly playful harvest games, tying up the old man, they're actually enacting the ritual death of the corn spirit.
Exactly. It's not just a prank. It's the symbolic end of the cycle. Sometimes it was even more explicit. In Norway, people would literally say, the old hayman has been killed.
Whoa.
Or in Lithuania, the person cutting the last corn stalk was said to have cut off the boba's head, the boba being the old rye woman spirit, or struck the old rye woman dead.
The language is stark.
It is. And remember the strangers in the Lydiers' myth. That's mirrored too. All over Germany, it was common practice to seize any stranger who passed by a harvest field.
Seize them.
Yeah, bind them up with corn stalks, make them pay a small forfeit to be released. If a stranger actually walked into the field during harvest, they might be symbolically mown down or threshed.
As if the stranger becomes the embodiment of the corn spirit, forced to undergo its ritual fate.
Precisely. They stand in for Lydiarces or for the corn spirit itself.
So, the killing of the corn spirit, whether represented by the last harvester, an effigy, or even a stranger, it's a necessary part of the cycle.
Absolutely. And throwing that representative into the water, like in the Lydiarces myth and many of these customs, connects directly back to that rain charm idea we saw with Adonis. It's all about securing fertility, ensuring regeneration for the next season. The death is necessary for the rebirth.
What a journey this has been. Just wow. We've gone from ancient myths in Egypt and Phoenicia right through to, relatively recent folk customs in Europe.
And seen this incredible thread connecting them all.
This profound link between gods dying and rising and the simple, essential cycle of vegetation. Adonis's gardens, Osiris sprouting corn, Demeter's grief, the corn mother in that last sheaf.
All rooted in this deep human dependence on the earth's bounty, and expressed through rituals often based on sympathetic magic.
It's just amazing to think how these ancient beliefs, born from something as fundamental as getting enough food to eat, ended up shaping ideas about life, death, rebirth across huge spans of time and space.
It really reminds you, doesn't it, that even our most complex religious stories, our grandest myths, often have these incredibly practical, down-to-earth agricultural roots.
Yeah, it shows that deep human need not just to understand the world, but to feel like you can influence it, using the tools they had, ritual, belief, magic.
The most powerful tools they knew.
So maybe the next time you see a field of wheat ripening in the sun, think about those invisible spirits, those ancient gods that people once believed dwelled right there inside the grain. And the millennia of rituals aimed at making sure it came back year after year. Makes you wonder, what do we still carry, maybe unknowingly, from those vital ancient connections to the earth?